Margaret Sinclair, Maggie to the few people who'd ever bothered to know her, stood beside her worn leather suitcase, trying not to cry as she watched her father's car disappear down the long dirt road. At 23, Maggie had learned to accept disappointment. She'd grown up the youngest daughter of Harrison Sinclair, a wealthy real estate developer who measured worth in dollar signs and social standing. And by those measures, Maggie had always fallen short, literally and figuratively, in her father's eyes. She was curvy, soft around the edges in ways that made her father wince at society events. While her two older sisters had married well, corporate lawyers and investment bankers, Maggie had preferred books to parties, baking to networking events, and kindness to social climbing. Her father had called her his disappointment, his embarrassment, and in a particularly cruel moment, his biggest failure. The final straw had come 3 weeks ago when Maggie had refused to marry Donald Whitmore, the 58-year-old business associate her father had chosen for her. Donald had money, connections, and a wandering eye that had made Maggie's skin crawl. When she'd said no, her father had made his position clear. She could marry Donald, or she could leave. Maggie had chosen to leave. But leaving meant having nowhere to go and no money of her own. Her father had controlled every aspect of her life, including her trust fund, which he'd locked away until she came to her senses. That's when her father had come up with what he'd called a lesson in gratitude. He had a tenant farmer on some land he owned out west, a man named Thomas Barrett, who'd been working the property for years. Harrison had decided that Maggie would go work for this farmer, learn about real work and humility, and perhaps then she'd appreciate the comfortable life he'd offered her. Maybe a summer on a failing farm with a poor farmer will teach you that you're not in a position to be picky, her father had said coldly. Consider it punishment for your stubbornness. So here Maggie stood, in a simple floral dress that had seen better days, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid, facing a farmhouse that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind. The screen door creaked open, and a man stepped out onto the porch. Thomas Barrett was perhaps in his mid-40s, with shoulder-length brown hair showing threads of gray, a weathered face that spoke of years in the sun, and a barrel chest that suggested strength despite his age. He wore a blue plaid work shirt unbuttoned over a white undershirt, work jeans, and boots caked with honest dirt. Behind him stood an older man with a white beard and open vest, watching the scene with curiosity. Thomas approached Maggie with a handshake extended, his blue-gray eyes kind despite the weariness in them. "You must be Margaret Sinclair. Your father called ahead, said you'd be coming to help around the farm for a while." Maggie took his hand, surprised by the gentleness of his grip, despite the calluses. "Just Maggie, please. And I'm sorry for the imposition. I know my father probably didn't give you much choice in this." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, understanding perhaps, or sympathy. "Your father and I have an arrangement, but that doesn't mean you're not welcome here." He gestured toward the older man on the porch. "That's Jack, my foreman. We run this place together." "Run what exactly?" Maggie asked, looking around at the small farmhouse and the immediate area, which seemed modest at best. "My father said you farm his land?" Thomas exchanged a glance with Jack, something passing between them that Maggie couldn't read. "Something like that. Come on, let me show you where you'll be staying. You must be tired from the drive." Over the next few days, Maggie discovered a rhythm she'd never known existed. Thomas and Jack ran what appeared to be a small operation. Some chickens, a vegetable garden, a few cattle in a nearby pasture. Thomas was up before dawn and worked until after sunset, but he never complained. He spoke softly, moved with purpose, and treated Maggie with a respect she'd rarely experienced. "You don't have to work if you don't want to," Thomas said on her second morning, finding her attempting to collect eggs from the chicken coop. "Your father sent you here as punishment. I'm not going to enforce that." "What else would I do?" Maggie asked, holding up an egg triumphantly, her first successful collection. "Sit around feeling sorry for myself?" "I'd rather be useful." Thomas smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. Then I'm grateful for the help. Maggie learned to feed the chickens, tend the garden, and help with meal preparation. Thomas and Jack were patient teachers, never making her feel stupid for not knowing how to do things that were second nature to them. And slowly, Maggie began to notice things that didn't quite add up. The farmhouse, while old, had been recently repaired. New shingles on the roof, fresh paint on the porch, solid construction underneath the weathered exterior. The pickup truck was vintage but impeccably maintained. The cattle in the pasture were high-quality breeding stock, not the mixed herd she'd expected. And twice a week, men in business casual clothing would arrive, speak quietly with Thomas in his office, and leave with folders of paperwork. "Thomas," Maggie asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, "what exactly do you farm?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee. "That's an interesting question. My father said you were a tenant farmer, that you worked his land." "Your father says a lot of things," Thomas replied carefully. "What do you think I do?" Maggie had been pondering this. "I think you're more than just a farmer. Those men who visit, they treat you like a business partner, not a tenant. And this land," she gestured at the rolling hills visible in the distance, "there's a lot more of it than just what's around this house, isn't there?" Thomas set down his coffee and looked at her with those steady blue-gray eyes. "Your father doesn't own this land, Maggie, I do. All 12,000 acres of it." Maggie's breath caught. "What?" "I own Barrett Agricultural Holdings, one of the largest sustainable farming operations in 3 states. We lease some land to other farmers, we run cattle operations, we grow organic crops that supply restaurants and stores throughout the region." He paused. "Your father knows this. He's been trying to buy my land for years to develop it. I keep saying no." "Then why did he tell me you were a poor tenant farmer?" "Because he wanted to humiliate you," Thomas said gently. "He wanted you to think you were being sent to work for someone beneath you, someone struggling, so you'd feel grateful for your old life and come running back. What he didn't count on was me telling you the truth." Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you telling me?" "Because in the 2 weeks you've been here, I've watched you work harder than most people I employ. You've never once complained, never acted entitled, never looked down on the work or the people doing it. You've treated Jack and me with respect and kindness." Thomas's voice softened. "And because I think you deserve to know that your father's punishment was actually a gift, you just didn't know it yet." Over the following months, Maggie bloomed. Thomas taught her about sustainable agriculture, about treating land with respect, about building something that would last generations. She learned to drive a tractor, to understand crop rotation, to appreciate the delicate balance of a working ecosystem. But more than that, she learned about herself. She discovered she had a head for numbers when Thomas let her help with the books. She found she loved working with the Sustainable Food Program, connecting local restaurants with farm-fresh produce. She realized she was strong, not just physically, though she'd gained muscle and stamina from the work, but mentally and emotionally. And somewhere along the way, she fell in love. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was in the way Thomas always made sure she had water when they worked in the sun. It was in the patient way he explained things, never making her feel stupid. It was in the quiet evenings on the porch, talking about dreams and disappointments and what really mattered in life. It was in the way he looked at her, not with the critical eyes of her father or the predatory gaze of Donald Whitmore, but with genuine admiration and respect. "You see me?" Maggie said one evening, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Thomas looked over at her, his expression soft. "Of course I do." "You're remarkable, Maggie. How could anyone not see that?" "My father doesn't," she said quietly. "He never did. He looked at me and saw someone who didn't fit his image of success. Too heavy, too soft, too kind. Not ambitious enough, not calculating enough. A disappointment." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Your father measures worth in dollars and status. By his standards, I'm probably a disappointment too. I could have sold this land years ago for millions and retired to some city penthouse. But I'd rather build something meaningful. I'd rather treat the land with respect, employ people fairly, create something sustainable." He turned to look at her fully. "You're like that, Maggie. You measure worth in kindness and integrity. Your father thinks that makes you weak. I trenze. Hink, it makes you extraordinary. 6 months after Maggie had arrived, her father's car pulled up the long driveway once again. Harrison Sinclair stepped out, looking around with barely concealed disgust at the rural setting, clearly expecting to find his daughter broken and ready to comply. What he found instead was Maggie standing beside Thomas on the porch, her face tanned from sun and healthy from good food and hard work, her eyes clear and confident, wearing work jeans and a plaid shirt with easy comfort. "Margaret," Harrison said, his tone condescending, "I trust you've learned your lesson. Are you ready to come home and accept Donald's proposal?" "No," Maggie said simply. Harrison's face darkened. "No. After 6 months of poverty and hard labor, you're still being stubborn?" "I haven't been living in poverty, Father. I've been living with purpose." Maggie stepped forward. "Thomas owns 12,000 acres. Barrett Agricultural Holdings is worth more than your real estate company." "And even if it?" Thomas asked. "Coming up behind Diffie it wasn't. Even if he really was the poor tenant farmer you told me he was, I'd still choose this life over the one you planned for me." "You can't be serious," Harrison sputtered. "You'd choose this?" "This farmer over—" "I choose kindness over cruelty," Maggie interrupted. "I choose respect over control. I choose building something meaningful over accumulating wealth for its own sake. And yes, I choose Thomas over Donald or anyone else you'd pick for me." Thomas stepped forward then, putting a gentle hand on Maggie's shoulder. "Mr. Sinclair, your daughter has been an asset to this operation. She's smart, hardworking, and has a head for business that I suspect you never gave her credit for. If she wants to stay, and only if she wants to, she has a place here. Not as punishment or charity, but as a partner." "A partner?" Harrison sneered. "In business and in life," Thomas said quietly, looking at Maggie with unmistakable love. "If she'll have me." Maggie felt her heart swell. She turned to Thomas, seeing in his weathered face everything she'd ever wanted: respect, kindness, genuine love. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes to all of it." Harrison Sinclair left in a fury, but Maggie barely noticed. She was too busy kissing Thomas on the porch of the farmhouse, surrounded by the land they'd worked together, building a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection. 2 years later, Maggie stood in the same spot where her father's car had first left her, but everything had changed. She was Margaret Barrett now, co-owner of Barrett Agricultural Holdings, which had expanded under her business acumen. She ran the marketing and distribution side while Thomas focused on farming operations, and together they'd built something remarkable, a sustainable farming operation that proved you could be successful and ethical at the same time. Her father had sent her to a poor farmer as punishment, expecting her to break and come crawling back. Instead, she'd found her strength, her purpose, and a love that saw her for who she truly was. Do you ever regret her and wrapping his arms around her waist as they looked out over their land? "Giving up your old life?" Maggie leaned back against him, smiling. "I didn't give up anything worth keeping. My father thought he was punishing me, but he actually set me free." She turned in his arms. "He thought sending me to you would teach me humility. Instead, it taught me my own worth. He thought poverty would break me, but he sent me to a man richer than he ever was, not in money, but in character." "I'm the lucky one," Thomas said, kissing her forehead. "Your father threw away a treasure because it didn't look the way he expected. I just had the good sense to recognize what I was being given. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as punishments. Sometimes being cast out leads us exactly where we're meant to be. And sometimes the people who reject us do us the greatest favor of all. They free us to find those who will love us exactly as we are." Maggie had been sent to a farm as an insult, a lesson, a punishment. She'd stayed because she'd found respect, purpose, and love. Her father had tried to teach her that she wasn't good enough for his world. Instead, she'd learned that his world wasn't good enough for her. And that made all the